The year was 1967. Dean Martin had everything a man could want. His television show was the highest-rated program in America. His records sold in the millions. His face smiled down from billboards across Los Angeles, that famous sleepy grin promising laughter and music and escape from the troubles of the world. And yet, on the night of October 14th, Dean Martin walked into a burning building on Sunset Boulevard, while 200 people ran the other way. The fire had started in the kitchen of a club called the Venetian Room. A grease fire, they said later. The kind that spreads fast and forgives nothing. By the time the first screams cut through the Saturday night crowd, the back half of the building was already consumed by orange light. Dean had been across the street at a private dinner. He heard the screams before he saw the smoke. A lighting technician who worked the Sunset Strip remembered the moment. He was standing on the sidewalk watching the chaos unfold when he saw Dean Martin push through the crowd moving in the wrong direction, against the current, toward the flames. Someone grabbed his arm. Dean shook them off without looking back. The technician said he would never forget the expression on Dean's face. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't bravery. It was something else entirely. It was recognition, as if Dean had been waiting for this fire his whole life. The smoke was thick and black, pouring from the windows like something alive. The heat pressed against anyone who got too close. A physical wall that pushed people back. Dean walked through it. He didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He just walked, steady and deliberate, like a man keeping an appointment he couldn't miss. Inside, the world had turned to chaos. Tables overturned. Glasses shattered on the floor. The air was poison, heavy with smoke that burned the eyes and clawed at the throat. Most of the patrons had already fled through the front. But Dean wasn't looking for patrons. He was looking for someone else. A busboy, 19 years old, name of Anthony Caruso. He'd been in the back when the fire started, trapped behind a wall of flame that had cut off the rear exit. Nobody knew Anthony was still inside. Nobody except a waitress who had stumbled out screaming his name. She grabbed at people's shirts, begging someone to help. But the heat was too intense. The smoke was too thick. The fire was too hungry. Dean heard her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait for the fire department. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around his face, and disappeared into the burning building. The waitress collapsed on the sidewalk. 60 seconds passed. Then 90. The front windows exploded outward, showering glass across the street. A woman screamed. Someone said it was too late. Someone else started to pray. And then Dean Martin emerged from the smoke carrying Anthony Caruso over his shoulder. Both of them were alive. Dean's hands were burned. His shirt was ruined. His lungs would trouble him for weeks afterward. But he was alive, and so was the boy he'd carried out. The newspapers called it heroism. The television reporters called it courage. But those who knew Dean, truly knew him, understood something different. They understood that Dean Martin hadn't walked into that fire to save a stranger. He'd walked into it to save himself, from a memory that had haunted him for 40 years. To understand what Dean did that night, you have to understand where he came from. Steubenville, Ohio, 1927. A steel town, a hard town. A place where men worked the mills until their backs broke and their lungs filled with black dust. The air always smelled of industry, of burning, of something being forged or something being destroyed. Dean was born Dino Paul Crosetti. His father Gaetano was a barber. His mother Angela was the heart of the family. They lived in a small house on South 6th Street, in the Italian neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were impossible to keep. Dean was 10 years old when the fire happened. A neighbor's house. The Benedetto family. 4 houses down from the Crosettis. It started in the middle of the night, a kerosene heater that tipped over while everyone slept. Dean woke to screaming. He ran to his window and saw the orange glow painting the night sky. He saw his father running toward the flames with other men from the neighborhood. He saw his mother clutching his baby brother, tears streaming down her face, and he saw something else. A boy in the upstairs window. Marco Benedetto, 12 years old. Dean's friend. The boy who taught him how to throw a baseball and who shared his lunch when Dean forgot his. Marco was pounding on the glass. The smoke was thick behind him. Dean's father and the other men were trying to break down the front door, but the fire was too hot, too fast. The walls were buckling. The roof was starting to cave. Dean stood at his window, frozen. He wanted to run. He wanted to help. He wanted to do something, anything, but his legs wouldn't move. Fear had turned his body to stone. Marco's face in that window. That's what Dean carried with him for the rest of his life. The boy's eyes finding Dean's across the darkness. The moment of recognition, the silent plea, and then the roof collapsed. Marco Benedetto died that night. So did his mother and his 2 sisters. His father survived, but only his body. The man Dean remembered as strong and laughing became a ghost who wandered the streets of Steubenville until he disappeared entirely. Dean never spoke about that night. Not to his family, not to his friends, not to anyone. He buried it so deep that most people who knew him had no idea it had ever happened, but it lived inside him. A coal that never stopped burning. Years passed. Dean left Steubenville. He changed his name, reinvented himself, became the charming crooner who made everything look effortless. He built a wall of cool around himself that no one could penetrate. The jokes, the drinks, the easy smile, all of it was armor. A way of keeping the world at a distance so no one could see the boy who had stood frozen at his window while his friend burned. By 1967, Dean Martin was at the height of his fame. His variety show drew millions of viewers every week. He was the king of cool, the man who made success look like an accident. He played golf, told jokes, sang songs, and seemed to float through life without effort. But those who watched closely saw something else. A distance in his eyes, a way of leaving the room, even while standing in it. His longtime valet, a man named Charlie, who had been with Dean for 15 years, noticed it most acutely. He said Dean was the loneliest man he ever knew. Frank Sinatra saw it too. Frank once told a reporter that Dean was the only man he couldn't read. Everyone else Frank could figure out, their angles, their fears, their desires. But Dean was a locked room. What Frank didn't know was what lived inside that room. The memory of Marco Benedetto. The guilt of a 10-year-old boy who had done nothing while his friend died. That guilt had shaped everything about Dean Martin. His generosity to strangers, his loyalty to friends, his quiet acts of kindness that he never spoke about and never wanted recognized. All of it was penance, a debt that could never be paid. On the night of October 14th, 1967, when Dean heard the screams from the Venetian room, something shifted inside him. He wasn't thinking about heroism. He wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about a window 40 years ago and a boy whose eyes he had never forgotten. This time, he would not freeze. This time, he would move. The hospital was quiet at 3 in the morning. Dean sat in a plastic chair in the hallway, his hands wrapped in white bandages, his throat raw from smoke. A nurse had wanted to admit him, but he refused. He wasn't leaving until he knew the boy was okay. Anthony Caruso, 19 years old. A busboy at the Venetian room. He'd been working there for 6 months, sending money home to his mother in San Diego. Dean didn't know any of this yet. He only knew that the boy was alive. A doctor emerged from Anthony's room around 4. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of delivering news both good and bad. "He'll be fine," the doctor said. "Smoke inhalation, some minor burns. He's lucky." Dean nodded. The doctor studied him for a moment. "You're Dean Martin. That's what they tell me. You saved that boy's life." Dean looked down at his bandaged hands. "I just happened to be there." The doctor shook his head slowly. "I've seen a lot of fires in this city, Mr. Martin. People don't go into burning buildings. They run away. What you did, that's not normal." Dean was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I knew a boy once. A long time ago. There was a fire. I didn't help him." He looked up at the doctor. "I wasn't going to let that happen again." The doctor didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and walked away. Dean sat in that hallway until dawn. Somewhere around 6 in the morning, a woman came rushing through the hospital doors. She was in her 50s, heavyset, with worry carved into every line of her face. Anthony's mother. She'd driven through the night from San Diego the moment she heard. Dean stood when he saw her. She didn't recognize him at first. She was too focused on finding her son, her eyes wild with the particular terror that only mothers know. "He's okay," Dean said softly. He's going to be okay. She stopped, looked at him. Who are you? I'm the one who pulled him out. Something broke in her face then. The fear collapsed into relief, and the relief collapsed into tears. She grabbed Dean's hands, not noticing the bandages, not caring about anything except the man who had saved her boy. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Dean didn't know what to say. He never knew what to say when people thanked him. You raised a good kid, he finally managed. Strong. He fought to stay alive in there. The woman looked at him with eyes that saw more than most. Why did you do it, she asked. Why did you go in there when everyone else was running away? Dean was silent for a long time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The hospital smell of antiseptic and worry filled the air. Somewhere down the hall, a phone was ringing. Because I owed someone, Dean said quietly. Someone I couldn't save a long time ago. The woman didn't ask who. She simply squeezed his hands and went to see her son. Dean left the hospital as the sun was coming up. He didn't call anyone. He didn't want attention. He drove himself home in his burned clothes and sat in his living room as the morning light filled the windows. His hands hurt. His chest hurt. But something else had changed. For the first time in 40 years, the coal inside him burned a little less bright. He hadn't saved Marco Benedetto. He could never save Marco Benedetto, but he had saved Anthony Caruso. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maybe the universe gave you chances to make things right. Not the same thing. Never the same thing. But something close. Something that honored the debt even if it couldn't erase it. Dean poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. He just sat there watching the ice melt, thinking about two boys separated by 40 years and the fire that connected them. Marco would have been 52 years old now. He might have had children, grandchildren, a life full of all the things that lives are full of. Dean wondered what kind of man Marco would have become. He hoped Marco would have understood. 3 days after the fire, Anthony Caruso was released from the hospital. Dean was there. He didn't announce himself, didn't bring cameras or reporters. He just showed up with a car and drove Anthony and his mother to a hotel he'd paid for. They tried to thank him. Dean waved it away. Just get some rest, both of you. But Anthony wouldn't let it go. Mr. Martin, he said, his voice still hoarse from the smoke. Why did you come back to the hospital, And now this. You don't know me. Dean looked at the young man, 19 years old. The same age Marco would have been when Dean was 22 and starting to make a name for himself in Cleveland. I know enough, Dean said. He paused. You remind me of someone. Someone I should have helped a long time ago. Anthony didn't understand. He couldn't understand, but he nodded anyway, sensing that there was a depth to this moment that went beyond words. Over the following months, Dean quietly paid for Anthony's education. He never told anyone. He made the arrangements through intermediaries, insisted that his name never be attached to any of it. Anthony thought he'd received a scholarship from a foundation. He never knew the truth. The Venetian room was rebuilt. Life went on. The newspapers moved to other stories, other tragedies, other moments of heroism and cowardice. The fire became a footnote, mentioned occasionally when someone compiled lists of famous people who had done brave things. Dean never spoke about it publicly. When interviewers asked, he deflected with jokes. I was just trying to find the bar, he'd say. Got a little lost, but those who knew him saw the change. His daughter Didina noticed it first. She said her father seemed lighter somehow. Not happier, exactly. That wasn't Dean's way, but there was less weight on his shoulders, less of that faraway look that had always made her feel like part of him was somewhere else. Frank noticed it too. Dean, you seem different, Frank said one night at the Sands. More here, if that makes sense. Dean smiled. Maybe I finally showed up. He didn't explain. He never explained, but Frank understood that something had shifted, something that had been locked inside Dean for longer than anyone knew, had finally found a way out. Years later, in 1985, Anthony Caruso was working as a fire safety inspector in Los Angeles. He'd made it his life's work. The boy who had nearly died in a fire now spent his days making sure others wouldn't. He inspected restaurants and clubs and hotels, looking for the hazards that could turn an ordinary night into a tragedy. He'd never forgotten Dean Martin. He'd never forgotten being carried out of that smoke, barely conscious, by a man in a ruined tuxedo who smelled of cologne and ash. When Anthony heard that Dean's son, Dino Jr., had died in a plane crash in 1987, he wrote a letter. He didn't know if Dean would read it. He didn't know if it would matter, but he wrote it anyway. "Dear Mr. Martin," the letter began. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. 20 years ago, you carried me out of a fire. You saved my life, and then you disappeared before I could properly thank you. I've thought about that night many times over the years. I've wondered why you did it, why you risked your life for someone you didn't know. I think I understand now. I think some people carry fires inside them that never go out, and sometimes the only way to quiet those flames is to walk into another fire and save someone else. I'm sorry about your son. I can't imagine your pain, but I want you to know that because of what you did for me, I have a wife and 2 children. I have a life, and I spend that life trying to protect others from the fire that almost took me. That's your legacy, Mr. Martin. Not the songs or the movies or the television shows. The lives that continue because you were brave enough to walk toward the flames when everyone else was running away. With eternal gratitude, Anthony Caruso." Dean received the letter 2 weeks after Dino Jr.'s funeral. He read it alone in his study. His hands were shaking. Not from age, from something else. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He never responded, but he kept it until the day he died. When Dean Martin passed away on Christmas Day 1995, his family found the letter among his most treasured possessions, next to a photograph of Dino Jr., next to a photograph of his mother, Angela, and next to a small faded picture of a boy named Marco Benedetto, a boy who had died in a fire in Steubenville, Ohio, in 1927. A boy Dean had never forgotten. Some fires never go out. They burn inside us, shaping who we become, driving us toward moments we cannot predict and choices we cannot explain. Dean Martin carried his fire for 40 years, and on one night in October 1967, he finally found a way to let some of it go. Not by forgetting, never by forgetting, but by walking into the flames one more time and proving to himself that he was not the boy who had stood frozen at the window. He was the man who moved, the man who saved, the man who honored the debt he owed to a friend he could not save by saving a stranger he did not know. That's the story they don't tell about Dean Martin. Not the songs, not the jokes, not the effortless cool. The fire that burned inside him, and the night he finally faced it. Some men are remembered for what they achieved. Others are remembered for what they overcame. Dean Martin was both. And on the nights when the smoke clears and the music fades, that's what remains. Not the applause, not the fame, just a man walking toward the flames. Because some debts can only be paid in fire, and some heroes are made not in the moments when they succeed, but in the moments when they refuse to fail again. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.